Hello, my name is Adrian Colazzo, and I reviewed The Guardian, which was made in 2006. It would be considered a action drama genred movie, and it is about two main characters for the most part, and their names are Ben Randall, who is played by Kevin Costner, who is the senior chief of the United States Coast Guard's Aviation Survival Technician Program, or AST. And the other main character is played by Ashton Kutcher. His name in the movie is Jake Fisher, and he is the main candidate or hotshot candidate that comes into the program. So the movie starts off with Ben Randall going on a mission with his team, and the mission goes south, and he ends up losing all of his team, and he is the lone survivor. And so they basically take him off of active duty, and they send him to be the chief instructor of this program. And all the while, his marriage is suffering, and his wife is leaving him because he has more of a commitment to the Coast Guard. So the majority of the movie takes place in the training and the intense training, I should say, and the dialogue and confrontations between Ben Randall and Jake Fisher. And ultimately, Jake Fisher ends up being in the Coast Guard, and Ben Randall sees him a lot like himself in many ways. And I think his main goal is to make sure that Jake Fisher is willing to put others first ahead of himself. And at the end of the day, the movie culminates in Ben Randall having to sacrifice himself on a mission to rescue Jake Fisher because a mission goes south, and that's ultimately how the movie ends. It's a great movie. I think there are three major leadership issues that I can apply to a ministry or a future ministry. The first one being trauma. So in the movie, Ben Randall experiences severe PTSD or loss when all of his crew dies at the beginning of the movie, and this affects him ongoing throughout the movie. Number one, it prevents him from being on active duty, and although he is older in age, he still is capable of being on active duty, and this is the reason why he gets sent to be the senior chief of the academy, right? Not only that, we see in the movie also that Jake Fisher has some trauma as well. And he puts on a good mask of hiding this. And eventually Ben Randall finds out that he was in an accident in high school. And he was the star swimmer. And his entire team died in the car accident, but he survived. And when I think of trauma, I think that trauma can affect many aspects of ministry because in many ways it can get in the way of us being able to be productive when God is calling us to certain things. I think if we haven't dealt with our past, or if there are lingering things or uncertainties that we face, a lot of the times they can affect us physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And it's important that we not only surrender these things to God, but also deal with them accordingly, whether that's seeking treatment, confiding in somebody, going to therapy. There's a lot of different ways that we're able to do that. The second issue that I see that it presents itself in the movie is pride and ego. Ben Randall is struggling with this pride and ego of letting go of not being able to be active duty. At first he is hesitant in wanting to go and train this team, but ultimately he goes to the school and becomes the instructor. And his pride and ego, I think, is what also puts him in confrontation with Jake Fisher, because I think he sees a lot of himself in Jake Fisher until they kind of get on the same page towards the end of the movie. And when it comes to ministry, our pride and ego can ruin our ministry if it's not in check. And I think a lot of what this semester has taught us is that submission and being surrendered to God's will and calling for our lives is of utmost important, because when we try to take things into our hands, or when we try to make the decisions or those type of things, our pride and ego is going to stand up and remove God from being in control and place ourselves at the center of control. And if we know anything about that, it's that those situations usually never end good, because although we may be able to handle ourselves well at times, we ultimately end up doing what is only in our self-interest a lot of the times, because our pride and ego is there to preserve our own self-interest. So in this movie, we see a lot of the clashing of both Ben Randall's and Jake Fisher's, because Jake Fisher has a lot of pride and ego that he hides behind based on his talent and his ability to do the job. But in reality, inside, he is a wreck still from what happened in the past. And this contention of their pride and egos are both them, I think, trying to heal from those things. The third issue that I see is priorities. As I mentioned earlier in the synopsis of the movie, Ben Randall is struggling with a failing marriage because he chose to put the Coast Guard first. And this is a problem because his wife should come first before his job. Yet we see it a lot throughout, especially in America, because it's such a work-focused society that a lot of the times people put their job or their title ahead of other priorities that need to be in their life, whether that be their kids or their family, their wife, or their relationship with God, for that matter. I think we do that at times too in our pursuit of wanting to have a title or finish school or do these things, and we forget that we're supposed to be having relationship every day with God. More specifically, I think when we're in ministry, priorities can really mess things up. I think it comes back to our pride and ego, not having our priorities straight if we're really only focused on ourselves. Especially when we're in ministry, I think we need to understand that sometimes we have to lay ourselves down more often than not in a leadership position in order to see other people thrive. And that's ultimately what we're called to. I think if our priorities are not straight, if we're not aligned with what God's will is for our life, then I don't think we will be in leadership all that long when it comes to our ministries. And the same thing, Jake Fisher is struggling in the movie with priorities because he is in a similar situation with a woman, and he doesn't know whether to choose the Coast Guard or whether to choose this woman. And ultimately, he ends up choosing the Coast Guard, and kind of almost follows in the path of Ben Randall and with his wife, and but at the end of the movie ends up moving stations, I would assume, and reunites with the woman, I think because he realizes that life is short and that there's more to life, and he wants to build something. I think another interesting dilemma that we see throughout the movie, or that is focused on, is Ben Randall's saves. It's talked a lot about that he holds the record for how many people have been saved. And this is one of the focuses of the movie. Jake Fisher's goal throughout training, or the the program is to break all of Randall's records. And he ends up doing that. And Ben Randall purposely allows him to do that in order to point out something in Jake Fisher's life, and that is that these things really don't matter, that they are his pride and ego getting in the way of the ultimate call of the Coast Guard, which is to be willing to put your life on the line to save others. And I think this culminates towards the end of the movie when Jake Fisher asks Ben Randall what his number is. And he's surprised by Randall's answer when he says 22 or 23 or something. And because that is actually his number of lives that he's lost and hasn't been able to save, as opposed to the ones he's saved. And that's the only number that matters to Ben Randall, is the ones he wasn't able to save. And I think this gives us a glimpse into the dilemmas that I spoke about in regards to the trauma and the pride and ego, and even his priorities, because I think everything that is going on in his life, the sense of wanting to be the Coast Guard and save people, comes at the cost of him being unable to save people. And this negativity and this sorrow, or whatever you want to call it, probably follows him every day. And I think that's with any sort of military or any sort of servant position, active duty, I think that's something that veterans really have a hard time with, and we see it in the drug abuse, and we see it in the suicides, that the trauma and the PTSD of what they've experienced ultimately ends up killing them in a lot of situations, or leaves them severely damaged, whether that be physically, mentally, emotionally, probably even spiritually as well. What I took away from the movie as the primary leadership principle or theory is something that we've recently talked about, and that is the idea of servant leadership. Now, we all know that active military, at any point in time, you could be putting your life on the line for others. And in my opinion, that is of utmost example of servant leadership, regardless of their leadership position. In this movie, we see that the primary goal of the training and the program is to see who is fit to be able to do that when the time comes. Are you fit enough physically, mentally, emotionally, physically to be able to do that? And ultimately, Ben Randall goes through this process of being unable to do that, as we see, but also at the end of the movie being able to lay down his life for Jake Fisher, somebody he's grown fond of, somebody who he's probably sees himself in, and also sees as some sort of a son-father figure, and he lays his life down for him. This is the extreme example of servant leadership. This is what Jesus did for us. He was the epitome of servant leadership, not only in that he gave his life for us, but he exemplified how we are to treat others and act in society and be amongst other people. And I think this movie does a really good job with at least highlighting the theory of servant leadership. And to be honest with you, I think we have to sit really long and hard and ask ourselves if we are really willing to surrender our lives so that others may live. And I think you can see this in multiple degrees. Yes, for some of us, God may call us to literally surrender our lives where he takes us in future ministry, because we may be going to dangerous places, and the world as we see it is getting more and more dangerous. And I think that's something that we really have to grasp and really come to terms with, because I think if we don't, we're leaving a lot off on the table with how God can use us. Not all of us are called to that. Some of us may be called to surrender our lives in a local church and place others first. And this could be equally difficult, because sometimes we think our lives are our own, and we want to build a family, and we want to retire and do these things and all that. But God may be calling us to be more active in our ability to surrender our lives for others. Now, to be honest with you, I'm not sure what other leadership approaches could have been taken in this specific situation. I think they're all, the one I chose to focus on was the servant leadership aspect of the genre of the Coast Guard and what the main characters are going through. I think there's a strong display of transformational leadership as well, as we see these individuals go from people who are unable to do the job to surviving the onslaught of the program and graduating and being in a position that they are being certified to be able to do this job. Like I said, I think this is a tough question in regards to the movie because I think it displays a lot of the things we've talked about. Based on everything we've talked about in class, I think this movie hits on a lot of subjects. As previously mentioned, I talked about pride and ego, I talked about trauma, I talked about these things, and I think a lot of these things we see in our dark side analysis, things that can prevent us from being good leaders, just like they prevented Ben Randall at times from being a good leader or being able to be his 100% in leadership. But at the same time, I think he somehow figured out a way to deal with his trauma when needed and his pride and ego and set those things aside to be able to save lives, which was always his call. So I think that the dark side of leadership and our lives are clearly evident in this movie, and they do a really good job at highlighting that and seeing how it can affect an individual in all aspects of their lives. On the same time, like I said, I think it displays an awesome display of the servant leadership model because people are literally laying down their lives for others. All in all, this is a good movie, although the reviews are terrible. I enjoyed it. I've seen it multiple times, but I never get tired of seeing it because of the message behind the movie, and I highly encourage everybody to see it. I've seen most of the movies on this list, like Braveheart and all these other epic movies, but for some reason, as soon as I saw this one on the list, I think the Lord specifically highlighted the servant leadership aspect of this, and it kind of just drew me to the movie. And I think we can learn a lot from this movie, and I think we can walk away in a real world setting from it and be able to be thankful that we have people that are willing to lay down their lives for our freedom and our liberties. And especially with what's going on in the world today, we need to really appreciate those individuals and treat them with the respect that they deserve, because in a lot of parts of society, they don't get that. Thank you for watching my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that my synopsis of everything has encouraged you to watch the movie if you haven't.